All right, welcome everybody. This is presentation 2 of 2 on creation of culture. I mentioned also I'm going to do a presentation next week on Tuesday that sort of resets us, tells us where we are with regard to the project overall, the plan, and so forth. The last time, really briefly, ran through a bunch of the intention stuff we've encountered, gave a new model of that, talked about a bunch of the consequences that follow from our greater ability to access people's minds, notably the discovery of the fact that there are lots of negative intentions and that people are permeated by intentions. This sort of sets up a problem. I talked about the descent into the intention war, gave some examples or illustrations there, and then concluded by mentioning or by stating the thought that Emily articulated. The claim is that culture is a shared set of practices that exist to manage intention phenomena, especially to suppress, control, manage, etc., negative intentions. In thinking about topics, it's sort of a notable point when you get a paradigm or framework that you can work within that allows you to make incremental progress. There's a sort of number of features that paradigms need to have. And so a lot of us have had lots of thoughts about culture, but I think that Emily's idea basically is that plus the large amount of data we now have regarding intention phenomena, plus our experiences with it and the active problems that are being generated. That sort of given our situation, I think that that claim about culture is good enough to serve as a paradigm. So that's the brief recap, and I'm going to talk now about I'm basically going to use this presentation to set up the challenge. As far as immediate changes that will occur, the most immediate thing that will happen is that I'm resetting my schedule. I'm going to be meeting with a bunch of different people from most of the different teams, and maybe all of the different teams, and the working on trying to figure out a whole bunch of culture problems. This means that there's not obviously a ready-made thing that's going to pop out, and here we are in the new era. Rather, this is me marking that we're going to start transitioning, and there's going to be very serious work to the design and implementation or instantiation of a new culture. But so here I want to set up the problem. I think that this is something that then should be part of the shared understanding for what we're doing going forward. First, to give the argument a bit more formally, I think that if there's a sufficient load of negative intentions that are not adequately controlled, then you end up with war. You end up with intention warfare and normal warfare. I think that it's not a good idea that we be at war amongst ourselves. It's interesting claims as to when and how war could be good or useful or necessary. I will claim that it is not in fact necessary for us or good at this time. As such, I think that we should seek to adequately control negative intentions. Now, when you think about how do you control negative intentions, and here sort of the simplest thing to say about what I mean by negative is consult your intuitions or common sense or what people say now or what they say historically or things that seem generally very bad for the achievement of your goals, especially if they're very broadly stated and if that was the only thing around would be very bad for you. So things like hatred and destruction are going to be things that are classically negative. I maintain the unity of the good thesis, so I think that there's something good in everything. In fact, in the relevant sense, there are only the goodness elements But when you have something that is less good, that excludes more elements, then you get things that are problematic. So then how you've got a person, they have a negative intention. Maybe they hate another person and hope that that person's sort of projects fail. All right. Well, you can just permit the relevant things. You can allow the person to have and act on the intention. A whole bunch of intentions that are bad aren't that problematic. And if people have and act on them, then it's not as good, perhaps, as if that wasn't happening, but it's not that big of a deal. Another thing that you can do is you can protect people from the effects of people acting on their negative intentions. This is, if you think you've got person A here, and they've got their negative intention towards person B, well, you could just permit it. You also could protect the person. So, sure, this person despises this person, and this person's actions aren't being constrained, but you set this person up so that they're adequately defended. This person wants to throw rocks. This person lives in an adequately fortified castle. The rocks are irrelevant. Another thing that you can do is you can go with suppression. Here, the person has the negative intentions, and you get the person to block the expression of the negative intention. And there's an interesting question as to how exactly that works. I'm going to say more about that, not because I know the answer, but because there's lots of questions that can be asked there, and so I'm going to ask a lot of questions about that in a bit. But this is certainly something that people learn to do, and it is effective in many, many circumstances. Of course, there are side effects, and then there's a question as to what to do about that. Another thing you can do is you could help the person to improve, so that the person is, rather than being unhappy, switches over to having the negative intention towards the person. Rather than despising them and wishing their destruction, instead, the person comes to recognize that it's good that the other person flourish and, in fact, wants to help them. Then there's also the sort of historically sort of well-known option of destroying the person, where if the person doesn't exist, then maybe the negative intentions are gone. That's clearly outside of our scope, and we're not going to be looking into that more at this time.
Comrade Stalin said, "No person, no problem."
And
that's an actual quote.
And I think that there are a sort of number of downsides from that approach. I'll note that it's undesirable for a bunch of reasons, and not legally permissible.
And people who advocate for it should be sent to re-education.
We're not killing people. What?
You fired someone?
That's exile.
Yeah. Would that fit under protection? That's another.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's good.
And it seems like another one is training people in defense against the dark arts.
It would be a version of protection.
Okay.
I think there's a stronger one than suppression, which is that you demand that the person sort of like repress the stuff so that it doesn't interact with their functional content. Which society also does.
I'm going to say that that's another form of suppression. Yeah.
Is there a thing that is like expression of the actual negative intention, but in a way that ends up being beneficial? So the thing I'm thinking of is when you turn something into art, and it's okay to be angry because then other people get catharsis or something.
So there's going to be, and so we could say some nice
sublimation.
Yes,
sublimation.
That's what I was actually thinking.
I think sublimation is going to be something like a combination of suppression and allowing the person to do other things and or count as improvement. But yes, I think that if you have a person who so we don't know a bunch of the specific dynamics around this, and so there's going to be a bunch of things in that area. I don't think it's always going to be you cut the thing off, and then when you see it growing a little bit, you cut it off even closer to the stem or to the root. But yeah, so there's going to be a number of things that are going to fall under this. If you look through and examine these, we've put a bunch of time into improvement. I think that at least compared to other existing sort of alternatives that we've been able to discover, we're doing shockingly well. Nevertheless, we are still clearly not good enough to simply solve the negative intentions that we discover or solve the negative intentions that are being acted on. The total load of negative intentions, this is an empirical claim, would not hold for all groups at all times, and hopefully will not hold in as extreme of a form in a future society. But right now, a claim does hold. We don't have the capacity to handle all of the things through just straightforward improvement. Yeah.
This is all sort of in the reactive frame, but like when we come here, we don't hate each other because we don't know each other. So like presumably there's also some origin of these negative intentions. Like where do they come from? So there could be prevention side. Like we arrange ourselves such that we don't actually get the conflicts that result in it.
Yeah, so you could think of like something like prevention as a maybe. Yes, we could add prevention. Prevention seems excellent. So my claim is that this one by itself is not going to be adequate, and then there are intentions that are sufficiently bad that permission alone is not going to work. We're not within range for being able to have a combination of prevention and protection. And similarly, if we were to exile all of the relevant people, then none of us would be here anymore. So because of this, I think there's all sorts of benefits that come from training people up in protection and also having systems to help defend people. Similarly, all sorts of benefits from preventing the things and from improving people. But I think that even once you take into account all of the other things, it's still the case that we're going to have to manage without solving the negative intentions. Then there's a question as to whether everyone should just do this individually or whether we should do this as a group. The individual version is, okay, you've got some negative intentions, go handle those. The alternative is that the group coordinates on the management of the negative intentions. I think that what I should say is the individual option, is not the option of everyone manage it themselves. Manage it for themselves. The individual option is that we all help to, or we all individually act in an uncoordinated way to manage the problems of negative intentions in the environment. So this is sort of like deputizing each person individually to enforce and cajole or exhort or bully or disincentivize or etc. People as each of us see fit. So we could do it like that. That would be a more Wild West version of the thing. The alternative is that the group coordinates on how to manage the negative intentions. My bet is that one, the group's got to work together. And then if we go with the definition of culture as the set of mechanisms that groups use to manage intentions, especially negative intentions, then this means that we need to have a culture. Okay, so that's part of the argument. But it could be that when we already have a culture, right, there's the culture out there, reality, look at it that way, and we have we also have the thing that we've developed as a result of sort of milling about and trying to do various things, sometimes trying to create culture, sometimes not trying to create culture. And so we have a weird hybrid where maybe we've imported 80% of the things and 20% are different. It's an interesting question how much some people would think we've created more or differed more from what's happening outside. Some people will think, well, we've created 2%. I'm not really sure there. But we do have these alternatives. There's the nearby surrounding culture. There's the thing that we have now. And there's a whole bunch of different cultures that exist out in the world. I think that we need to have a culture that's different than the one we started with and different than the one we have now, because the previous culture and our current culture are inadequate to handle the intention phenomena that has been revealed through our research and training. Okay, we have got all these problems, we're not sure what to do, it's really not straightforward. And you're like, okay, I seem to have received an intention object from John that's messing with me. Whose fault is that? Is that John's fault? Is that my fault? I have a susceptibility after all. Well, but then maybe it's the group's fault because they didn't have an intention that John synced with in such a way that, okay, well, also, actually, it turns out it wasn't John. It turns out it was a different thing, or a different person, or we don't understand what's happening. And that's just one example. As soon as you start taking seriously the intention transfer stuff, it's not just the sort of shocking, okay, this person found this intention object in their mind. Just, so-and-so was being touchy in a meeting. Why? It's just super hard to say why. Well, maybe they should, calm down, or maybe the other people should stop vibing at them in a way that, etc. And, it turns out the social layer is saying something completely insane about them, and no one noticed, and this is the thing that's great. We now know that we're interacting with objects that the previous culture and the thing that we came up with, or our modification of it, just does not know how to handle it. Or maybe that's fine. No, the thing is descending slowly into a more chaotic state, more chaotic than we want. So, no. So this means we need to do something else. And so then either we're going to import some other culture or we're going to develop one. And if we import some other culture, we're going to import it and then use it, or we could import it and use it as a springboard to take us to the next one. Like as a comparison class, you have the monastic academy, which has some, relative to the population, surprisingly strategic people in it. They're thinking about AI. They've got, sort of reproduced a bunch of our original thinking on things. And they decided, rather than digging deep into research in the area of culture, that they were going to start with a pre-existing culture, the culture of monasteries. And then, of course, probably it's going to differ across monasteries. At the very least, they're going with the general monastery model. And this is causing them... Okay, so they decided to import a culture. We could do that. I think that I don't think any existing culture is actually good enough to import for our purposes. And the problem is to import something and use it as a springboard. I basically think that's going to take a while, and I think we're going to make more progress on our own. If I'm wrong about that, then maybe we should do something like the monastic academy is doing and just import monastic culture or a different culture and work to get ourselves sort of immersed in that and then use that as a springboard to develop the next thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you're talking about culture here as if it's sort of a natural kind, but the definition is that it's a set of mechanisms.
Yes.
Is there a reason for talking about it that way rather than just talking about we need new mechanisms to solve the specific problems that we have?
Yes. So I think the reason I'm thinking about it as a cohesive thing is that there's very much a whole determines the parts, or each of the things affects each of the other things. So it's not like you're dealing with a car where if there's a problem with the bumper and a problem with the fuel gauge, those are entirely separate and don't affect each other. Like if we decide like the issue of who is to blame, or who changes things in whatever case, or which things count as problems, or like who should be allocating attention where, who decides what happens in what case. These things are all going to affect each other. So that's why I'm thinking of them as sets. I also think that you end up with subcultures. And I'm going to say a bit later on, especially when I talk about a sort of interesting model of communication that I've been thinking about, where you'll have the main thing and then you'll have a whole bunch of subversions of the thing that have developed different types of adaptations. Because of this, I do think that we'll find that there is such a thing as culture or cultures and then subcultures within them, as opposed to it being an entirely sort of unstructured blob mass.
Is there a brief definition or clarification that can be given for the the culture concept here, or is it best to use the common sense culture concept?
Well, so the thing that I'm going with, which is the thing that I said Emily stated, which is that it's the set of mechanisms for managing intention phenomena, especially managing negative intentions, which includes suppression, control, release, etc. Yeah.
Maybe just to emphasize the holistic part, call it a system of mechanisms, instead of just a set.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds good. Proposal tentatively adopted. Okay, so to summarize, bad intention shit's happening, so we need a culture. The old ones aren't going to be good enough, so we need a new one, but I think we'll invent one faster if we just straight out try to invent it, rather than if we immerse ourselves in a thing and then go from there. I also don't think any of the ones that exist currently would be good enough. That's why you'd have to immerse and then use it as a springboard, but I think that's going to take way longer than we'll go if we just go directly. I do think that that is relative to research capacity. It could be that the Monastic Academy is actually taking the correct route for them given their research capacity. I think we can figure stuff out surprisingly fast. Yeah.
How much do you endorse sort of doing like research and importing just certain sub-features or certain pieces of social technology? Like I know some people have read about Bridgewater, and it's like maybe you don't import the entire Bridgewater culture, but maybe you find specific pieces that are useful.
Okay, yeah. So the question is, how much do I endorse looking into other cultures and seeing what we can import? I would say I definitely endorse doing that as a way of spurring thought, coming up with ideas. I think because of the holistic nature of the thing, it's going to be very hard to just like, well, I like honor.
Okay, yeah.
Let's just have honor, but none of the other relevant things. I'm not even sure what those are. Let's just have honor, though. I think that won't work, and you'll end up LARPing if you do that. There's another element here also, which is that, and this is something that I happen to think quite strongly. I'm not perfectly sure this is right, but I nevertheless still hold this view that when people look at cultures, when people look at traditions, etc., you note all of these, there'll be like rituals and practices and so forth. And the things don't exactly make sense. You're like, well, why is it that the person, wears that color robe, and why do we do this, this? Well, I don't know. It's just this is the sort of the way that people do the things. I think that people think of that as a feature. So that's true of many, many, many elements of culture. And I think that people think about those things as being part of the functional version. I think that those are parts of the decayed version, and that when culture is created, it's created because the people are just trying to solve practical problems. It's just practicality. The reason that they have the robes is because they're hiding their bodies, because they only want their face to be the thing that's transmitting the intention. The reason it's this color is blah, blah, and blah. And when they were in the midst of the problems, they had the data and could work out exactly what to do. As things got better, then people will forget the reasons, and then they'll keep doing the things because that's how they were done before. So I think there's this way when you try to study examples of things, you have to go find the correct example. This is also true with startups and with religions. People say, religions, I want to start a religion. Let's look at the Catholic Church. Catholic Church, late stage religion. Okay, not how it got started. They're like, let's make a Sunday service, but just take out God. Okay, no, that's not how that works. Then other people are like, well, let's go look at cults. Okay, that's like one step more sophisticated, except all the cults you'll think to study are failed attempts to start religions. They are not going to become as big as Catholicism. So why are you studying the wrong thing? And so then you're like, well, let's go back and study what happened at the beginning with the correct things. Yeah, good idea, better. Really hard to figure out what happened then. And also, did you note you're in a different social context, different different technological landscape? How much of what they were doing was tuned to that? Answer, you don't know. So I think if you have the idea that you're going to copy as the centerpiece, then you lose. The thing that you are doing as part of the centerpiece is you are solving actual problems that you have. But then you can look around and then get all sorts of ideas. I mean, I think you could get a lot of cool ideas by looking at the things people are doing. Okay, so let's talk about the challenge. I think that the challenge is, the first part is that I think that there's a frequent trade-off between order and skill development. If you suppress more of the negative intentions, this is the simple picture, there's going to be complexity, but if you suppress more negative intentions, you get more compartmentalization and lower skill and less fighting. If you suppress fewer negative intentions, then you get less compartmentalization and greater skill, but more fighting. And I think that's not the entire story. I do think that as you start getting people to compartmentalize, you get an uptick in synthetic intellectual abilities. So I think as you get people to compartmentalize, you'll get people better able to work with systems and better able to do logic and math. I also think the societies that tend to focus on that then tend to redefine intelligence so that it refers only to those things as opposed to all the capacities that the people are losing. I also think that with enough compartmentalization, the system may break down entirely, leading to more fighting. So it's not just as you clamp down more and more, things become more and more orderly. After a certain point, the people are not going to be able to maintain it for one reason or another, and the system will break. I'm not sure about this, and certainly ready to be corrected, but with my scant knowledge of history and looking sort of very broadly, it looks to me like different civilizational setups sort of deal with the trade-off differently, such that classical societies have less suppression and more fighting but more skill. And then Christian societies are more mid in terms of suppression and mid in terms of skill, and modern societies are more suppression and less skill, noting that there is the uptick in synthetic intellectual abilities. And it's an interesting question if that just keeps going up as you have people compartmentalizing more, or if it goes up for a little bit and then trails off. But so there's this trade-off generally between, and we see this in training where it's like, okay, the person can't build models of this thing. Why? Well, because all their content about X is buried in this part in their mind. Well, let's just connect it up to the other things. Great, we've caused decompartmentalization. We have now undone a degree of suppression, and oh wait, there's all of these negative intentions suppressed as well. And so then, as you give people the ability to build sort of more and more general models, we just see that we are doing the thing where you unsuppress, and that leads to leads to the negative intention effects. I think that we have some advantages. One of the advantages is that we have a substantially more precise understanding of how the mind works and the ability to cause precision changes in people's minds in a way that I think is historically unprecedented. This means that it seems like we might be able to manage the trade-off better, so that we would be able to develop a culture that was simultaneously more ordered, but also allowed people to develop greater skill. Now, there's a question as to how far precision engineering abilities, and we're, of course, working towards precision engineering. We can do some things now. We'll be able to do more things later, but there will be an upper limit to that. And so then there's a question of how well we can handle the trade-off. In any event, this gives us two constraints on the problem. One is that the thing needs to be adequately ordered. We can't have the system break down, dissolve in a pool of fighting. It also needs to be that we are able to train people adequately well. The goal is to cause the world to become much, much better. For that, we need highly skilled people. For that, we need to train them. We've been working on the training for a while. So if we decide to cut off the training part of it, then we need a new world improvement strategy. This then, working through the trade-offs here while trying to avoid the trade-offs and sort of get higher levels on each of these, are two parts of the problem. There are two other parts. Another thing that we need to have for a culture is an on-ramp. We have to create something that people can join. If the thing becomes unjoinable, then it cannot grow. If it cannot grow, we cannot win. So it needs to be that the thing is set up in such a way that we can move people from their pre-existing cultural background into our culture. And then it's also the case that we need to have the ability to coexist with the surrounding society. We don't want to create something, if we fail, so all of these things are necessary. If we fail this, we destroy ourselves. If we fail this, we need a new world-saving strategy. If we fail this, we can't grow, and so then the thing won't work. And if we fail this, we get destroyed by everybody else. So
or destroy everyone else.
What?
Or destroy everyone else.
Here, here.
Thinking about the earlier phase, also I think destroying everyone else constitutes a loss. Check out the basic goals. If we fail too early, it will destroy us. If we fail late, then we destroy it. Neither are good. We'd like to be friends. I'm open to arguments. Maybe we shouldn't be friends. I mean, we know.
There's something funny with the friend's intention, that's all.
Yeah, no, I know.
When you say let's be friends, I don't mean to say it, but there's like this air of defeatism in that already. I think the let's just be friends has an air of defeatism. It's like you'll stand over there and I'll flourish here and you'll flourish over there.
Yeah, I'm talking about the immediate stages of the thing.
You know, you friend zone a civilization or something.
Well, so I actually think that if you friend zone a civilization, the civilization will become very unhappy with you.
This is true. This is true. This is true.
I'm serious. I think that, having a group that hates you is one thing, but having a group that doesn't care about you at all,
that pisses you off.
That's substantially worse. Or a group that's like, yes, just note my total indifference to what's happening. If people's basic goals pertain to connection, then ultimately they're not looking to have something like universal friend zone. They're looking for a much more tightly coordinated result at the end, and then I think that we're going to aim for that, but I think that we're going to not be able. So some people will be like, "Oh, we should be, adopt the perspective of the ruling class." We're not the ruling class right now.
I am.
I maintain my claim, and so there's a transition that will be managed in positioning ourselves so as to be able to rule or help people to rule.
Also, friend zone doesn't mean you don't care about them.
No, that's true. That's true.
Just don't have sex with them.
It depends.
I wasn't
So there's
proposing.
like
I was not
fade away.
to clear that. I was not
It's
proposing
like
sex
same
with a
thing for me.
civilization. That's not my kink.
Yeah, no, okay, yeah. So there's loosely spoken, loosely. We're just
Loose and common.
It's all being transmitted non-verbally. Okay. So,
That's the friend zone.
what? In defense of the friend zone?
Defense.
No, I'm serious about the. I mean, so we will need to position ourselves relative to society. Do we want to be the crazy uncle, where they're like, what are they doing? They're like, I don't know. But they come over every once in a while and make people uncomfortable at the dinner table. It's like, I don't want to aim for that one.
That's where we are right now.
Yeah, well, I do think that some of the EAs and rationalists and so forth will think that. I think other people take a happier view of us, but I think that we haven't been sort of like the most communicative and interactive and so forth. So I think we need to work something out. Consider friends to be a non-pejorative, positive, mutually beneficial relationship.
I was not
that's
responding
not
to
too
friends.
extreme. And
I was responding to the tone when friends was said. There was in fact
too
content
complex. All right. All right. All right. So, all right. I think that this is the general challenge. I think that this is a sufficiently constrained enough challenge that we will be able to make progress towards it. I will say more about, there's also a number of specific problems or challenges that we have, and so I think working on those with these as the constraints is in fact a solvable problem. Yeah.
This is a stupid question, maybe. I assume coordination is bound up with order. We can imagine order without coordination.
Yeah, that's right. So I think that the
So you can imagine everyone's really tame, but we're not like building billion-dollar companies and running campaigns.
Yeah. No, I think that that's right. So there's also going to be the thing which we could, say, fitness for purpose, where I do think that it will be useful to develop a community, and we'll end up making a distinction between the purpose of the community and the purpose of the project. But I think the purpose of the project is to cause substantial positive change, and if we do all of these things in a way which disqualifies us for being able to accomplish our goals, then that's not good. So obviously we want this, which means we're going to need the training to still be able to produce the effective, benevolent people who can coordinate with each other.
Is the culture meant to encompass the community and the project, or just the project and then eventually all of society?
It's a great question. That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think the smoothest thing would be to have it be that it encompasses the project most centrally, and then the community, and then is also such that we can get something like smooth adoption. Though I think the actual roots for the adoption of culture are going to be complex, and we'll have to understand them. I don't think that if you have a geographical map and just imagine a sort of radiating sort of concentric circles coming out, that's how the thing's going to work. It's going to be much more like you want to create something that it's possible to have elites grow up into, and then have it be that they can then disseminate it through all of the channels by which culture is normally disseminated. That's like sort of one or two steps more sophisticated than imagining the radiating sort of map geographically sort of arrayed. But it's quite possible that you'd want to create something that was itself not the culture that would be adopted by whatever world you wanted to create. It could be that you create something that's the provisional culture or the culture of the provisional team that then takes the relevant steps so as to create a further culture. And so it could be that this thing is a springboard. Okay. So I'd like to talk about the anatomy of negative intentions. I understand negative intentions a bit, not very much at this point. Daniel?
Just one thing I want to ask for clarity is there an anticipation that there will be a single culture that is set up into which everyone would sort of like move towards, or that there could potentially be multiple?
Okay, so the question is single culture or multiple. The thing that I actually think will happen, so I'm open to multiple being the correct answer. The thing that I actually think will happen is that we have right now a single culture. It's like, here's mainstream society, here's us, and then inside our thing we have some subcultures. I think that what's going to happen is we're going to move this direction, and these things, we're going to end up with a little bit of sort of crystallization of cultural practices and so forth. But then I think the thing's going to get unified under a single culture. I think that that's very, very likely. But I'm open to that not being what ends up happening. see you raising your hand? No. Okay, cool. Okay. Yeah.
My cool lookout diagram, I think like the subcultures escape the bubble. Like, because I think there's like ecosystem culture, which is itself kind of a subculture of what's happening here.
Well, yeah, so I think what's going to end up happening is you're going to end up with this, and there will be some subculture type things, but I think it will be substantially unified. And then I think there's going to be...
I'm talking about the current situation.
Oh, okay.
The current situation is that we are not all in some unified thing that is breaking away from society, but rather that there are multiple things that are breaking away from society that have some overlap.
It's an interesting question, and I am open to that view, and we should discuss it. Yep.
I think maybe to just briefly add to that, it's the case that most societies have sub-societies inside them, which is somewhat analogous, and there's a question of the degree of control exercised by the overall society.
Yeah, that's right. So there's an interesting question of how you delineate these things. I'm going to say something later about intention zones. And I think my current theory would be that this is answered through intention zones, but I don't have that developed well enough to be able to argue about it in a concise way. So I'm going to say maybe I'm open to that.
I think a very relevant thing here might be the Ottoman system, the millet system. We talked about it at one point. We'll talk about it more, but the interesting thing about the millet system is it had concrete, formalized points of contact between the Sultan and various very different subcultures, including like the Orthodox Christians, like the Sunnis, some other groups as well. I think the Ismailis had their own thing. The Jews had their own thing, yes. And the thing is, the personal coordination between the Sultan and, say, the Patriarch of Constantinople was what was keeping the two entities coordinated. And that's rather interesting. Though I think that's like a variant of like an imperial mindset. Like the imperial intention, I think, has agglomeration as part of it.
Yeah, so okay.
And like the enveloping of other intentions.
Yeah, so I think one of the things we'll need to figure out is also what's happening here. I think my thoughts aren't sort of developed enough well to draw more than a hazy diagram, which I then erase soon after. So let's, I want to talk about the anatomy of negative intentions. So there's, I'm going to use negative and bad interchangeably here. Maybe they're interchangeable, maybe they're not. Maybe there's subtle differences in use. In general, so now I think you can distinguish between intentions that are heading towards the basic goals. We started off with this idea that maybe people have multiple basic goals, and then over the course of time, maybe they're all different, and then it looked like they were pretty similar, and then more similar, and it looked like there were fewer of them, and the whole thing trends in the direction of thinking that there's one and that it's shared, or that there are a small number and that they are very similar to one another. This is an empirical question to be sort of figured out by looking at people's minds, but we haven't had any trouble in practice trending in that direction. And so then there's the path that a person follows to get to the basic goals. The intention will be an expectation about what will happen, also frequently an expectation about what the person will do as part of what will happen. I think that you can, the first distinction that's useful to make with regard to intentions is the thing heading towards the basic goals or not? So you might say, but aren't all the things heading towards the basic goals? It's like, well, yes, but if you don't think of this as a sort of time series, if you imagine that this is actually sort of we're traversing a space, you could imagine that your way of getting there looks more like this, where during this path there are steps forward, there are steps back, and so then you can think about, you could take a person's complete intention. Inside CT, the person believes that their basic goals will be achieved, so there will always be some intention, or the total intention will end up here. You can also consider partial intentions. These will be any intentions other than all of them together, so to speak. And then when you look at partial intentions, you certainly can have intentions that things go in the opposite direction. from the achievement of the basic goals. Now, if you look further down the road, you'll see that there is some group wants to destroy the world so that it is then remade. It's I think there's a fairly straightforward way in which the destroy the world part is a negative step and the remade part is a positive step. And you can also judge good and bad both on you can judge it on the content of the intention, or you can judge it on what actually happens. And so you might say, the person mistakes, the person doesn't realize that the food was poisoned and gives the food to someone. I was just trying to give them food so that they would be healthy and happy, etc. Good intention. You poisoned the person. Maybe the person was reckless, maybe the person was negligent, and so forth. There will be cases where, or there will be lots of contexts in which if you go and look at the internal logic of the thing, it's good, but in its actual context and what it does, it's bad. And the same thing for bad intentions. There will be cases where the internal logic is that it is trying to move away from the achievement of the basic goals in a sort of normal sense. But in fact, understood in this context, is going to end up being very helpful. So I think keeping these distinctions in mind, that's how I'm thinking about good and bad intentions. There's another thing that's worth noting about intentions, which is the degree of directness. So directness, this one is much more direct than this one. I like the balance formulas. You want to go left and right at the right times, or you want to go forward and back so that you can go forward. You might think, well, if retreating takes you further from the accomplishment of the basic goals, then why ever retreat? There are times when it makes sense to retreat, even though it moves you further away. It improves your position, all things considered. And so in many cases, the sort of correct path across a space, or through a battlefield, or in investigating and engaged in a research project, will involve moving forward or will involve retreating. And so then and so I want to make this distinction between direct and indirect intentions, where a person might have an indirect, let's say the person has an indirect helping intention, where the plan is to sort of hang around for a while nearby until eventually you and they develop a good enough relationship, at which point they might make a suggestion. This is just very, very slow. Or the person might have a sort of plan for, they try to make friends with you, but it's not going to work because you're not going to understand them, so they're going to leave, but then you go get them, or they come get you, and now you're friends, and then you can help them. Okay, that's an example of an indirect intention. I think that this background lets me introduce the concept of sketchiness. So right now I'm thinking of sketchy intentions as intentions that are indirect and also bad. And so what you'll end up with in a lot of cases is we've got a society that is trying to push people in the direction of positive intentions. And you're supposed to say that you're doing the positive things, you care about the people, and you're not trying to secretly undermine everything. And you're not even supposed to think about it like you're trying to secretly undermine everything. There's just this thought that occurs, and you feel weirdly pleased as you watch things dissolve. But why is that? Anyway, no time for introspection, more time for helping people. And so
this definitely describes some people.
Yes, exactly. So then when you look at intentions that are on the face of it good, frequently there is sketchiness, by which I mean that they have an indirect intention to cause something bad. And they've developed all of these surface adaptations that allow them to look like they're doing something good.
What about the opposite of sketchiness, where there's a bad intention, and when you look at it, they developed all of these indirect ways to do good?
Yeah. So
I've actually been shocked by this phenomenon over the last 2 years.
So I think I don't have a good word for that, but that's a thing.
It should have.
I think there should be. I'm sure there's a word. What?
No.
Anti-hero
is different.
No, but it's So I think you could have it be that the and I think this happens where it could be that the control mechanism is locking you into or trying to lock you into doing something, but you're just too good of a person. And so you keep sort of unprinciply violating the relevant things and saying this, that, and the other, and then things are going great. And that's because you want things to go well. And so there's absolutely that. I wanted to put sketchiness on the map because in trying to identify negative intentions, a whole bunch of them are, and this is one of the things that makes this hard. If this was as easy as, which way is the arrow pointing? Back, bad. Then, okay, that would be much easier. But instead what you have is people who are trying to help, but they just can't motivate themselves to do this one piece. Also, they foresee the failure of the project. Or the failure of the thing they're doing. And it's because that one piece wasn't done. Yeah, that's right. And so and then the person will be like, well, I gave it my best, they say, as part of the adaptation that they have created in order to make the thing look like it was good, when in fact, underneath, the thing was bad. I think that then you can get things that are only moderately sketchy, and then you can have things that are deeply sketchy. So I wanted to add that to our map. So that's a bit about negative intentions. There's weird stuff that shows up in bodywork if you are working with a visual image interface, where frequently the negative intentions, you get the difference between inanimate ones and animate ones, and then non-humanoid and humanoid from the inanimate or from the animate ones, where frequently you get negative intentions appearing as bugs or aliens or demons or devils. Why, it's a great question. It's really very interesting. It is notable that, like, I think that insects of certain types, like if you just have like a fly flying around, like that is as a template for a rogue negative intention or an uncoordinated intention. Like it just moves around, you can't get it to do anything, and then it flies in your eye or something like that. And so so I think it's not.
What if bugs are negative intentions made manifest?
I mean, the world is a strange place, and so that's something. Yeah.
What is the intent of an ant?
We don't want to go so negative on ants immediately, but you want to wonder.
Yeah, we don't want to lose our EA allies.
Ants are coordinated.
What do you say?
Ants are coordinated.
Yeah, that's right. Ants are coordinated. Okay, yeah. Flies.
But not
spiders.
ants
are on team good.
Yeah, spiders.
They're not that coordinated.
Yeah, they're just like doing random shit.
Definitely slugs. They build enormous cities doing random shit. What's their coordination?
This bears investigation. Okay, let's.
You're sure we shouldn't import ant culture?
Yes.
I call Queen.
Fine. Tyler will be in charge of having all of the children. Better get to work.
Put it on the wall.
That's right.
Queen
Tyler.
tea.
I just become really sassy.
Okay, cool. So I'll talk a bit about fighting negative intentions, because I believe that understanding them will allow us to combat them. And then there is this question as to what is the ideal attitude to have towards them. Should we fight them? Should we embrace them? Should you have the attitude of converting them? Interesting question. At least at some points I maintain that fighting them is the correct thing to do. And I'm going to have that framed for right now. There are a few things about negative intentions which are quite notable. So one thing is that negative intentions are by their nature flawed. Sorry, everyone who is a subscriber to Manichaeanism. So the Manichaeans believed that there's good and there's evil. They are equally opposed to one another. They are two principles, and the world is a battleground for good and evil in that way. At least in CT, good and bad are not symmetrical. The complete intention always ends up achieving the basic goals. because I think the evidence is tending in the direction of people have one basic goal, it's the same across people, and in principle fulfillable for everyone simultaneously. For those reasons, I think calling it the good is in fact warranted. But so then, if we go with that, then the person's complete intention is good, and this means that all negative intentions will contain weaknesses. They will all be such that they are, in the person's mind, eventually overcome. So this is where you get the thing being turned. There's a question for a given intention whether it understands, so to speak, or contains inside of its content the logic for, explicitly contains the logic for its undoing. In some cases, you'll have there being internal provisions for the intention being undermined. And so the person is planning to, let's say the person is planning to leave, and they're leaving little clues to you as to how to bring them back, and that can be seen. And the person understands that they're not trying to leave forever. They just happen to seem to need to continue to leave because people aren't responding to the things that are part of the intention that would bring them back. That I think of leaving as a negative intention because it looks like the basic goal is connection, and so the but so that's an internal provision. You can also have an external provision where you have a negative intention that also includes the intention to never change and to never receive any evidence. The person, so I make a distinction between resignation and despair. Resignation is where a person will act in a bad way because the person believes that that's what's going to happen. They just believe that things will go badly and they act in accordance with it. That's resignation. I think that despair is fortified resignation, where the person believes that things will go badly, they act in accordance with that, and also are not open to considering otherwise. The person turns their mind away from the relevant evidence. The person drives themselves further in the direction of resignation. You can have despair intentions that are such that they do not contain internally the provision for them being turned around. But because in the end the person ends up achieving the basic goals, there will be something that intention does not take into account. There will be some way in which it is anticipated that it will be beaten. So this is one thing that's very useful to understand about negative intentions, which is they are, at the end of the day, all necessarily flawed, and such that the person believes they will be overcome. And of course, it could be that in reality the person is there creating their unfriendly artificial intelligence, believing that they will be brought back, from the edge, and then they, end up accidentally, prematurely turning it on and destroying the world. And so it's not that negative intentions can't end up issuing in something utterly catastrophic, including things that preclude the achievement of the person's basic goals. It's just that that's going to occur because of the mistake that they make with regard to reality. Yeah.
So then there's the other type, which is the intention which is towards the goal, but
Yeah.
then has the negative actual effect on the world. So
Yeah.
that's not going to be flawed in the sense of the person expecting it to be overcome necessarily, but will be flawed in the sense of it missing parts of reality.
Sure. Yeah, that's, yeah. Yeah, certainly. Okay, so that's one thing to note about negative intentions. Another thing to note is that it looks like one way to think about them is that they are contagious. This is the lesson from intention transfer. I think that it will be possible to think about these things epidemiologically. The introduction of a new intention that people do not have immunity to can then spread through a community. And there's an interesting question as to how quickly. I'm currently inclined to believe very quickly. I think that merely understanding a negative intention gives you an imprint such that it's there in your mind, and then it will affect you unless it can be put in its appropriate place in a larger system of intentions. And so my current model for how this works is essentially that people have all the goodness elements and all the goodness somewhere in their mind, but the goodness elements are in different compartments. And so if we imagine these are the goodness elements and the compartments, then the person encounters an intention packet which is made up of these goodness elements. This is already encompassed by this, and so that's fine. They understand it here. The person encounters this, also no problem. The person encounters this. This is something that does not squarely fit into any of the things they have encountered, and so they receive the imprint of this. You can think about these as aesthetics, especially the ones that get really, really, really built out. And so you'll have I think that if we go through and analyze the aesthetic of classical buildings or the cyberpunk aesthetic, you'll find that there are certain goods that the things contain and some that they don't contain, and that those make for the difference between the different aesthetics. At least that's a hypothesis that I currently hold. And then you can look at modern society and what it's doing, where people in modern society are subjected to much, much less coherent, consistent aesthetics than, so imagine that you're growing up in a village in 1200 AD in Western Europe. Well, I think you're going to have way more uniformity of intention. The buildings, the surroundings, the works of art, etc. These are going to be that you have access to. Compare that to modern society where all the types of music and all of the movies and all of the books and etc. are presented. I think that what this means is that the modern mind is going to be set up notably differently as a result of having been permeated by so many different aesthetics. Actually, usually I'm like, pretty doom-oriented with regard to the direction of modern society. This is one thing that I think is really good. I think that, at least I currently think that there is a substantial advantage in having there be a whole bunch of well-developed aesthetics that people are exposed to. Yeah.
So that's along certain dimensions that's true. On other dimensions like architecture, that's not really that true these days. But the other thing is, like modern society, what you're talking about is more like the last 30 years. For the like mid-century, 20th century, the aesthetics were much more uniform.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so, I mean, just recently, yeah. Thank you for the correction. Yeah.
There were still a bunch of well-developed different aesthetics, and it's like early 1900s, it's like Art Nouveau, Art Deco, just all kinds of different things were already. The pattern is several hundred years old at least.
Yeah, it's just there was a period of
it sounds like it's gotten more extreme recently, though, with sort of mass distribution through the internet. Maybe the internet does save the world by giving access to enough aesthetics that make it so that, hey, I mean, look, if it ends up that the internet is largely responsible for saving the world,
the internet
then
is a portal to hell.
At least I'm if it's doing the work, then I'm on board. But then if we go back to the epidemiology framing, then with intentions, you have intentions spreading, but you also have the possibility of inoculation. You can have it be that someone has an intention that is much more functional and better and encompasses, in this sense, the negative intention, and that can be distributed and thereby inoculate the people. And so this is going to be something that, I mean, I've got this really simple model that involves letters. This has been adequate for my purposes thus far. There may be more to it, especially if we manage to work out the structure of the goods and the structure of negative intentions and get full catalogs. Then I think we might learn more. But I do think that we're going to need to think about the things epidemiologically, yes.
Maybe you'll cover this, but it seems like there's the other type of spreadable negative intention that's just built in resignation to, like, I just will do something, rather than you're receiving a good packet along with it. Maybe those things are less viral.
You mean, let's see, I think we'd have to go through and analyze some intentions, but I think that if you go through and look at what's good about the thing, it's not going to be, they don't believe they're going to get the thing, but there is something good about diligence, or there is something good about, so I think we'd have to look at the specifics. So then, on the topic of detecting negative intentions, I think we're going to need to look for both the regular ones and the sketchy ones. The direct ones are going to be easier to detect, but also less cooperative. The person is like, hope you die. Detected it, less cooperative. Person's like, I'm really excited in your project and I'd really like to help. As part of a surface adaptation on top of something more like hope you die, it's a little bit more difficult to figure out or to detect. I think overall sketchiness, unsurprisingly, is a mixed blessing. They're harder to detect, they're more cooperative, but it's a trick. And it's more proximate to a good intention in that it is more machinery for doing good things. I mean, imagine the person is forced to make various adaptations so that they end up perfectly resembling a good friend in every way, except that at the end, it was a trick. Well, I mean, they had to build out a lot of friend skills there, right, and do a lot of friend things, and that actually turned out pretty well, all things considered. It's the sort of thing that might even entrench a person on being friends with you, such that turning the last bit at the end, so that all along maybe it wasn't a trick, I think will be substantially easier. And so I think there's a way that you can be concerned. I think sketchiness is, in this regard, both good and bad. Bad in that it's heading the wrong direction and that it's tricky, good in that it is more cooperative, and that it has more sort of machinery present, so to speak, such that there are fewer steps to turn it into a much more functional good intention. At least that's my current understanding. How do you deal with bad intentions? Okay, well, you can face them in yourselves or other people. This can occur in the sort of plane of the mind or in reality. The general model for how to process the things, I think, it's just you've got two different regions in your mind. You've got intentions heading this way. You've got intentions heading this way. You pay attention to both. Propagation occurs. This gets subsumed into this. You're done. If you hit a block, then you need to improve the plan here until you can absorb this. Sometimes the intentions interact with each other, so you don't just have something inert sitting here that you're paying attention to. Instead, you go look at the negative intention, and it attacks you, or it tries to shut down your mind, or it can't be seen, or is pretending to be friendly, etc. In all of those cases, you interact with the things according to normal interaction logic. So, if you are working inside of the sort of more mythos visual interface, and you're looking at, some negative intention you have for someone, and you're trying to figure out how to overcome this, and as you pay attention to it, you get the visual image of the thing swiping at you with a sword, then, that provides a whole bunch of things that you can do. You can dodge, you can duck, you can block, you can turn the sword into a flower. There's lots, and then you'll find that these things work differently in different cases. I think that in fighting negative intentions, you should be quite careful. Combining all your intentions randomly is a bad idea. Intentions are plans, so you want to have it be that you are maintaining something functional. Combining all your bad intentions is a bad idea. You're like, oh, they're all goodness elements. If you add more of them, they become better. True. Also, so you'll have hatred and destruction independently, and then you combine them. I do think that the thing, and the dimension of examination of elements of goodness will have more of them, and so is more proximate to the perfect intention. Nevertheless, may also be more functional and more problematic, and so don't just go through and take all your negative intentions and try to combine those. I also think that if you are subsuming negative intentions under your most functional intention and do this too much, then the more functional intention can get overrun and become negative. So you want it to be that you are maintaining, you want to develop a functional positive intention and have that thing expand its dominion so that it comes to encompass more and more of the intention content in your mind. For dealing with other people's negative intentions in their minds, it's shockingly that the sort of same dynamics end up applying. One of the main differences is that you're interacting with another mind that can have its own plans and affect its own intentions in various ways. as far as fighting intentions in reality, you want to stop the negative intentions from having the relevant effects where you can. And so if someone is trying to undermine your plans, then you want to set things up so that reality has them fail. You want it to be that, it's, so to speak, on the battlefield of reality, you just want to defeat them in a straightforward manner. It could be that the correct way in reality to fight negative intentions is just to find them and defeat them outright. It could be that the right thing to do is to hem them into being sketchier and sketchier over the course of time until they lose the ability to be able to operate. Person's like, I'd like to be productive, and you're like, cool, that means you'd be happy to agree to the following system. And they're like, yes. You're like, great. They develop a local adaptation, also one step closer to implementing a good thing. Yeah.
It seems like the approach of combining and powering up the positive intentions as opposed to like focusing on negative intention debugging is something that we haven't sort of widely tried.
Yeah, and it seems like a really good idea. It seems like a really good idea to do.
Yeah. There is an adversarial learning nature here.
Yes.
Where like merely combining good intentions with flawed defenses against negative intentions can prove like very, very flawed, if not outright dangerous. Where there's a way in which the compartmentalization of good intentions also keeps them somewhat secure.
I see.
Yeah, you could think about it like you're going to put all the women and children and nice food, etc., in this barn, and then like maybe the barn's not that good, so it needs to have some fences and guns facing outward and shit. I'm saying you can collect good intentions and
like your image is so rural and so pure.
So maybe that the barn metaphor is the correct one. It could be that there are others here. I think we need to work out the plan. I don't think we've got the sort of like overall correct pattern.
Saying don't put all your good shit in an insecure area. I feel like that was
all your eggs in one basket. You mean?
You can put it all in one basket if the basket
put it
has
in
a
a secure basket. All of your eggs in a
basket.
secure basket.
That's
but if
right.
you have only insecure baskets,
you could have layers of baskets.
Different. Think about like a rotating system of eggs.
I stand.
James.
So when we're talking about all these metaphors and whether or not they apply and so on, a heuristic that I recommend for the interpretation is that the mind is no simpler than the models that it creates of reality.
Yeah.
So you can assume that for every model of reality you're capable of thinking, there should be structure in the mind that can correspond to it. So for any of these examples, assume you will eventually come across something which has this form.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so we'll have to figure out which of these work and which don't. I also think that we're going to need to look at the, so there's the sort of process of fighting negative intentions and so forth. There's also this question about, and I sort of went through that rather quickly because I've covered that in some other contexts. I'm also happy to expand on that for people. Something that is quite sort of like new, at least in how I'm thinking about this, is this idea of the control mechanism where you have your unsuppressed intentions and then your control mechanism and then the suppressed intentions. I don't exactly understand how this relates to the partition, but you also have your visible intentions, the partition, and the invisible intentions. I want to note that they're not exactly invisible. There's something weird happening here that's not the same as it's just unconscious. And so in terms of where you get negative intentions, you could have negative unsuppressed intentions, negative suppressed intentions, negative visible intentions, negative invisible intentions. I think the most common are going to be negative suppressed intentions that could be visible or invisible, or negative unsuppressed intentions which are invisible and are themselves sketchy and posing as or standing behind positive intentions. And so if the intention's not suppressed, you'll act on it. If you act on it and it's negative, well, in some cases that will just be how a person is, but in many cases they won't think about themselves as doing that. That's because what they have is a visible, unsuppressed good intention and an invisible, unsuppressed negative intention, and the invisible one is being implemented alongside the visible one. This is sort of like my example of refuting the person so as to give them the truth, where the dismissal intention was something that I was not clearly aware of. And so so I think this is the sort of landscape in which these are going to occur. I think something that we're going to need to understand is basically how control mechanisms fail. Like, there just are cases where a regularly suppressed intention comes out. The person blurts something out, or they flip into a mode where now they're willing to tell you all the things that they weren't interested in telling you before, but okay, now they are. So you get gaps in the control mechanisms. You also it's also the case that I currently believe that control mechanisms are themselves based in a sketchy intention. The control mechanisms, I think, are designed to prevent you from achieving your goals. And you're saying that you're fine with that. So you're wrong. Or you're being tricky. And you're like, no, I'm not. I don't care about I don't care. This stuff's bad. We should just get rid of it. I think we're going to need to understand the dynamic here because the whole thing is, the mind is aiming to achieve all of its goals, so the whole thing here can't actually be conceived on the internal logic as an effective control mechanism. That means that the whole thing will be being subverted.
Why couldn't it be deferred? You could just have it be that the mind plans to do this for now, and then it's
so I think deferring isn't going to count, isn't going to even feel like suppression. It's not going to show up that way. I think there's going to be a difference between you catch the thing and then, so it'll be you catch the thing and then remind yourself that you'll do the thing later versus you are just planning to do the thing later.
That seems like an implementation detail. Where you could plan to aggressively smash it for now.
Yeah. So,
because that's the thing that works.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to even figure out how to talk about these things. But yes, worth examining. Interestingly and amazingly, at least to me, there's also this question of managing the negative intentions inside of the group, where you also have the control mechanism, which is sort of social practices. You end up with the intentions you're trying to suppress, the unsuppressed intentions, and so forth. There are, I think, a lot of similarities, therefore, between the question of how an individual mind manages itself and how a group manages itself, which means that, in essence, Plato was right. At least in the Republic, Plato argues that there are these different ways the mind can be set up, and there's different sort of structures and ways they manage themselves, and there are these different ways that a city or a society can be set up, and that they correspond to one another. And so, at least as far as the correspondence in structure between the individual mind and groups, I think Plato essentially got that right, which I find deeply, deeply pleasing. It's so good. All right. I want to list a bunch of unanswered questions. We got like a million of them. So there's like structural questions, like what are the negative intentions? Maybe we can go get a systematic representation of all of them, and that will allow us to understand their weaknesses. Is there more to be said about the structure? I think that as we understand negative intentions, we will, at least for myself, adding sketchiness as a particular species of negative intention was very, very helpful for me in terms of understanding what it is that I'm looking at when I look at what people do. there's probably more to be said about their structure, and so that will be helpful. There are general dynamics questions. So we've got, there's like, how does intention transfer work? I think a lot more can be said here about the general dynamics. Mindy had an interesting proposal recently that the social layer results from where the body conversations get stuck. This is a sort of interesting thing where you have this seemingly autonomous social layer that's changing in a bunch of different ways. But we know it's got to be that the thing is riding on the nonverbal communication. Well, maybe what happens is the thing goes until it gets stuck somewhere, and then that's the thing that produces the social layer. I'm not sure that that's right, but better than my older hypothesis. There's this question in terms of general dynamics of how do we determine causation. It's just baffling to figure out who is responsible for what. It's just really hard to, person A yells because person B had an intention that set off person A's intention because of person B's intention because of something else that happened. Very hard to tell. There are a whole bunch of questions that pertain to the management of individual intention. So how do you suppress an intention effectively? How do you let it out? How do you compartmentalize? How do you decompartmentalize? We're all familiar with smashing our minds. Is there something more delicate, or no, that's the use of smashing? I don't know. Interesting question. We'll be figuring out what the sort of typical zone structure of the mind is as part of the investigation to the structure of the mind. It's being done through body reading research. There's going to be questions about partitions. How do you give introspective access to an area? How do you take introspective access away from an area? You may imagine that the thing that we end up deciding is that A, B, and C are good, D can't deal with right now. We want it compartmentalized and out of view. That'd be really interesting. We don't know how to do that right now, and so that's something that we would need to learn how to do. It might be that we wouldn't need to learn how to do it, but I suspect that we'll figure it out as part of doing all of these things. There's this sort of larger question of how the control mechanisms work. What causes the gaps? How are they typically subverted? I maintain that all the control mechanisms are sketchy. I also don't exactly understand. I think there's a lot more that can be said. I don't think that's the full logic of them. There's also a bunch of group intention management questions. How can groups manage or contain negative intentions, like culture? There's how can groups say, there's all of these are going to be. So how can groups safely release or improve negative intentions? There's this, the idea of temporary releases where you get like Mardi Gras or feasts. You also have Halloween, which seems like a time when people get together and do this really, really weird thing that involves a whole bunch of things that you don't think about normally. Like normally you don't think about like death and like having an axe in your head and there being a bunch of blood and so forth. And someone comes in with like an axe in the head outfit and you're like, cool. Oh, that's cool. Oh, really realistic. Zoe suggested the idea of actors as developing intentions inside of something like safe spaces or clean rooms, where you have it be that they work to develop and embody intentions, which they then communicate to audiences. Like maybe you want a specialized force of people who are processing and developing intentions and then distributing them to everyone else. Right? It could be that people learn how anger, how does that work? The answer is there are a bunch of movies and plays and etc. that people come into contact with, which are the best representation of the thing, and people see them, and then that sweeps through the society and leads to people being inoculated against the things, because it doesn't just have anger elements A, B, and C. It also is combined with a number of other elements. And so that's like a really cool idea. Maybe if you ban the artists from the city, so +1 for Plato on the similarity of the structure of the individual and the society. But he also suggests maybe that you should ban the poets from the society. maybe the poets are serving an important function in helping to inoculate people by providing intentions of particular types. Perhaps societies that did not have them would be easily overrun by the occurrence of a new person with a new intention. So there's the question as to how should we seek or avoid negative intention? Should we be shielding ourselves? Should we like say, okay, don't watch horror movies? Because like, or is it, no, actually you should, you know, you really don't like horror movies, well, it's because, you know, etc. It's like, what is happening with horror movies? Like something's happening, yeah.
Or like, don't play violent video games.
Yeah, that's right. So violent video games, we're gonna get an answer. We can like go back like 20 years and like publish it. So we'll get violent video games and then time travel, and then we'll go back and we'll be like, we have the answer. That would be the best use of time travel ever. No, but yeah, that's right. So violent video games, yes or no? Music, right? Should you be listening to music you hate? Well, because why do you hate it? You're trying to think about what your mind is doing in response to it. It's not absorbing this perfectly nice and functional intention. Or maybe, you know, certain types of music are problematic and we should avoid them. There's also like the question of how much should we go hunting for the relevant things. It's like, well, you know, it's like, we found various negative intentions. Some of them look like demons. All right, well, let's be demon hunters. It's like, well, you know, maybe one wants to be careful here. There's the problem of absorbing the fact of the immediate absorption of negative intentions you encounter. Maybe the idea that you're going to go looking for them is quite a bad idea. Or maybe it should be that you have, you know, particular like hunting parties that work in particular ways that come into contact with negative intentions and then manage them in such a way, process them, become inoculated, and then distribute the result to the people nearby. And then there's going to be sort of the effective overall strategies. Like, do we aim to incorporate all of them? You know, unity of the good, try to get the entire thing. Or are we going to just leave some unincorporated? There's the question of whether you have an entire group do this, or do you have some people develop immunity and then inoculate people? Should you be aiming to build mutually compatible aesthetics? You could imagine that the thing that you really want to do is, you know, if you've got... There's a bunch of, and so then you could imagine that you work to expand aesthetics to include more, such that you eventually have it be that there are a bunch of highly functional things that all can peacefully interact with each other, even though you haven't managed to perfectly unify all of the goods. So those are some questions that we have to answer.
There's a few more dynamics questions I want to add.
Yeah.
So there's going to be like whether defense or offense wins. So it could be that defending is way more expensive than attacking, in which case our strategies should change.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think the defense versus offense question is super important. It could be, here'd be a unfortunate scenario. Offense wins. And so if you adopt a relatively defensive posture, then you'll generally get destroyed, which is why groups that changed the world in the past end up going with such expansionary and violent or in many cases, violent strategies. It's because they just end up needing to take advantage of the fact that offense beats defense. It's a possible scenario. At least it turns out that at least the offense-defense balance is super important. What?
Defense can't possibly win. You can survive.
Yeah, well, So there's a question as to, let's say you decided to set up a stable and insulated group that had minimal contact with the outside world, except you occasionally encountered people.
Switzerland.
What?
Like Switzerland.
I'm thinking substantially more so. Right? There's a question as to, can you keep out other people's intentions if you're trying to? It could be, and this is something that I suspect, and I don't have an argument for this yet, but it's something that I suspect that there are a number of mentalities that have the more sort of like defensive, make things safe first, etc. Less oriented towards fighting, tend to like wince whenever I say fight, or combat, or we will crush them. I'm inclined to think that those sorts of defensive, something like more defensive strategies themselves have flaws that undermine and destroy them. And so I'm not sure that that's true. But so you...
doing fine.
What?
Switzerland's been doing fine.
Well, it depends. I mean, in GDP, in technological advance, in
achievement of the basic goal.
Achievement of the basic goals.
They've held defense for the last how many hundreds of years?
but militarily, but like to the intentions, like do they watch American media? I'll bet they watch a lot of American
Right,
media.
but they're also not totally pwned by American culture the way everyone else is.
An interesting question, which we will examine. Okay.
Another question I want to add.
Yeah.
Back to the egg question.
Yeah.
You've got actions, and then you've also got like control, like the ability to modulate levers in your mind, the ability to gain more power, the ability to receive evidence, and these all seem to be decoupled, and we don't understand the dynamics yet.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. I think that's right. There's going to be a thing about the. I think there's going to be a lot about the specific dynamics. Like when I use the letters, it makes it seem like they're all interchangeable. But I do think that knowledge and victory and love are all going to, even if in the final analysis they end up being the same, before you get to the final analysis, they don't look the same. And so there's going to be ways in which the understanding. I think understanding the internal logics of the thing is going to be quite important. Like, do we want to invest really heavily in love? Do that first. And then after that, epistemics. And then after that, go after victory. Or do you start with victory and then get truth and then get love and then get courage? I don't know. This is a great question. It also might be that we don't really have any other options except to amalgamate the things we have now and see what we have and then see whether we can import further things. And sort of take them in the sort of, it might be that there's like, you might have sort of individual receptivity that pretty much determines your development path. I'm not sure. Okay. Yeah.
You probably don't have to use 7 minutes.
One puzzle that I'm wondering about is that it seems like there's a certain way in which intentions can be like move extremely fast and be extremely viral.
Yes.
And another way in which you can interact with the person for like many years and like never pick up many intentions that they have. I'm curious for your thoughts on how that interfaces with the like building out capacity to fight negative intentions.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It may be that the systems are already thoroughly swamping each other such that you don't notice, but in fact, you think, well, I haven't picked up any intentions from the person, and that could just be really wrong. I generally think that's the answer, but I do think that figuring out where people have immunities, I think this is complex. So we need to figure. Yeah.
Just in response to that question, Daniel, it may be that responsive intentions tend to propagate things more quickly. Because if the default is lots of things are locked in stalemates, an intention that's like, oh, we're in this state, okay, change, will produce that. So our group's trend towards responsiveness may also increase our susceptibility to rapid transfer.
I think that's right. Okay. So what does all of this mean? So I'm going to say a few things, make a few suggestions. This will be sort of meant to be evocative. So I stated the general challenge. The general challenge is designing a culture that adequately manages negative intentions, permits adequate skill development, allows people to join, and exists peacefully in coexistence with the surrounding society. In other words, order, training, on-ramp, and coexistence. That's the general challenge. We then have a bunch of specific acute problems.
In fitness for purpose.
Fitness for purpose, yeah. So it's, which is so then there's intention conflicts. We just have it be that two people have a lot of trouble talking. Their intentions are clashing. What do we do in that sort of case? There's this intention object phenomenon. Found a weird mental object. I think it came from John. What do we do? Intention attacks. What counts as an attack, right? It seems like there's always a susceptibility on the side of the receiver. Nevertheless, like what counts as an attack? How do we determine responsibility? If A attacks B on the intention level, what do we do about that? Who does something about that? Like, do we have intention enforcement? Like, okay, that's interesting. There's this general thing about intention load. What do we avoid? Do we create shields? We just have to solve all of that stuff. Epistemics is an existing problem. So it just, in a lot of cases, people's epistemics is their control mechanism. Okay, that's what's happening. The truth intention is not as strong as you might think. They're using the things to lock themselves down. As you break down the control mechanism, you also break down the epistemics. Also, this shit is confusing. And we have to up our epistemic game in order to figure out what's happening. Sama noted that there are groups that, end up with a sort of microaggression accusation thing where picking on each other's intentions in various ways leads to problems in the group. I think part of that's going to come about as a result of the people not being able to figure out what's happening. The better we can figure out what's happening, I think the better positioned we'll be. I also think we're going to have to add information management around intention material. This is for safety purposes. Learning about this stuff and coming to believe in it can cause you to become more susceptible to it. Okay, so it's like, so then we have to figure, like, it's a big deal to introduce someone to the thing such that in a way where they become much more susceptible to it. Okay, that's just, we have to figure out what to do about that. I don't think it's obvious that we then just say, okay, fine to tell everyone everything. We have to learn how to manage the social layer. The social layer changes. People are I just find myself puzzled, others are puzzled about what it's doing. We need to understand its dynamics, and we have to make it do what we want. Unless that's the incorrect intention to have towards the social layer, in which case we will coax it to do what we want in a nice way. And I think communication, there's a lot of live communication issues, so I think this is something else that's like, this is the list of on-the-ground issues. We're going to work on solving the on-the-ground issues in the direction of, or tacking in the direction of coming up with the set of practices that fit the general conditions that I laid out. I do think that we're going to end up developing notable pieces of theory. I'm just going to gesture at this right now, but I'm inclining towards thinking that there's something like intention domains where you, with regard to different aspects of your life and maybe overall, you exist either under your own intention or the intention of some other person. And it will, I think, really matter who or what. And I think that we've been pretty squishy about this, where people sort of are doing their own thing, but sort of doing somebody else's thing and sort of doing society's thing. I think it's gonna come out that actually something much sharper is happening, and that will be very clarifying. I think we're also going to end up with a person typing system based on ways of interacting with either the partition or interacting with the societal control mechanisms. I think that you just get some people who, if you think of the thing that's the societal control mechanism as like determining the narrative, there are some people who sync with the narrative, work with the narrative, that's it. You get some people who...
Like orderly good.
What?
Orderly good, the chaotic good,
yeah,
is like the
good.
rogue.
No, I think we might get something like this. I mean, I currently think maybe
cool.
regular elites get their end up getting their verbal layer aligned with sort of with the societal narrative, whereas regular people are synced with the underlying stuff but get stymied and captured by or prevented from doing things by the verbal layer, whereas you get masters of different types. I think some people can't see the partition or refuse to, and so are constantly saying socially inappropriate things that then cause dissent or cause chaos of various types. I think we're going to find that that's not just like a thing they thought was fun. It's going to have to do with a different way they're managing their mind. They have a different personal control mechanism set up, and so they interact with the societal one differently. I also think we're going to figure out an interesting thing about communication, where I currently think that the partition / central narrative / central control structure inside of the society is going to be administered by language. And I think as a result, there will be a central language as well as adaptations. And I think a whole bunch of the communication problems we're encountering are coming about as a result of people having different strategies of interacting with or avoiding the central control mechanism of society, which is operating through language.
By language as opposed to just like symbolism, like you can imagine movies play a role.
Yeah, that's right. Language in a broader sense, but yeah, there's going to be still something about spoken language, I think.
Yeah.
So then just then to end with a statement about the likely future. I suspect, so the thing that will happen is that we work on this. I'm going to be meeting with a bunch of people. Concrete things will happen. We will develop cultural practices. There will be lots of experimentation, and then we'll end up with things that work. I think we're going to end up determining that the project intention needs to be adequately transmitted and adopted. I think that this is pretty likely to yield things like the reinstantiation of the narrative, a creation of a history of the project, development of norms for managing the social layer, development of norms for enforcement, including utilizing social pressure, and norms for punishment, and so forth. I'll talk more on Tuesday about how I think all of this will affect the development of a surrounding community, which is also something that I think we should do and will happen. So that's what's up.